All right. Well, thank you so much. So I'm joined in this work with three other folks. Nicola and Florian are here. Chris isn't able to be here today. So I'm a spokesperson, I guess, for our group today, but this is really a joint effort through a couple years of planning and various other projects we've each kind of been a part of before. So just some motivation for this project. There's a lot of terms on that title, and we'll try to break it down as we go, but let's just kind of start with some motivation here. That many facets of statistical work require creativity, curiosity, and personal judgment to be exercised by the analyst. So a lot of students tend to think about math, they tend to think about procedures, but there's just so much more that goes on in statistics. And I think most people in stat ed realize that, or that's something that we see in the literature that a lot of us talk about and care about in our teaching. And because of that opportunity for creativity, like what data to collect, whose questions to answer, all those different pieces are important. And for that reason, diverse voices are also important for the field as well. We want to see students and eventual practitioners that represent a diverse set of backgrounds, interests, and perspectives to kind of think about and challenge what the field does, how it develops, and what kind of questions we tackle. And going along with that, we wanted to do a study where we kind of look at how students see a place for themselves in statistics. If we want diverse voices, we need to understand how people get attracted to statistics, why they stay in, and whether they see their identity and their unique perspectives as having a kind of a voice or a place in the work that they do here. So we're in part of a much bigger project over several years. We're trying to study students basically at the end of each year as they're continuing their undergraduate programs in statistics. And today we're going to be talking about some first-year interviews. And we're looking at some general questions about what draws students into the statistics majors and what future do they see for themselves and where does statistics fit into that. And we have some long-term interests as well, such as how their perspectives of statistics are changing over the course of their experiences as majors. Who stays in statistics? What are the factors that seem important into that decision? And how what we can learn be leveraged to support diverse and historically underrepresented voices in statistics as well. And so we want to provide a question for you and something that you can participate in. This is a question that we ask our students, and we're going to ask you as well. Imagine that statistics was a person. What would they look like? What would they be wearing? How old would they be? Who would they be friends with? What might they be doing on the weekend? You don't have to answer all of these, but if you want to answer one of them in particular, you're welcome to share something in the chat. Any and all ideas are welcome, but just take a minute and feel free to type a thought that you have there. We have more time. I want to hear what everyone's reasoning is for some of these, but I am curious. Sayali, I don't know if I pronounced her name correctly, but when you say the sorting hat at Hogwarts, what are you thinking about?
Thinking about just slightly mysterious and wise on the inside, looks slightly ridiculous on the outside, and somehow just disperses this wisdom.
So wise. I like that idea. They look kind of ridiculous. That I guess maybe Ethan may or may not be thinking something similar. So Ethan, when you say wild rainbow dyed hair, what are you thinking about?
Well, I mean, statistics is a pretty young discipline. So I think of it
like a young, wild teenager you can't quite control yet. Still finding their identity.
Yeah, those are some interesting ideas. And as you can imagine, students say a lot of interesting and very different things as well. We had one student talk about this like kind of the cool girl, like the new girl on the block. Everyone kind of wants to hang around her. She's smart, but she's also kind of with it. She wears, you know, popular clothes, but then we have other people who say much more tame things, much more just kind of like your generic young professional, or sometimes somebody who's very old. So it seems like lots of people come up with very different justifications for their mental image of the statistics person. But yeah, that was something that we asked in the interview. We asked a lot of other things as well, but we'll come back around to that when we talk about our data here. But let's talk a little bit more about how some constructs that we're thinking about as we're looking at this data. So we're using this lens of appropriation, which we're borrowing from a science education article. And I guess there's been some other work since then using this term as well. And they defined appropriation as a complex and reflexive process of transforming scientific discourse so as to embody it in one's own personal story, respecting disciplinary rules and constraints. And they were looking at how high school physics students were basically finding kind of personal identity or interest and motivation in studying statistics. And in the paper, they talked about 5 different markers of appropriation that they were looking at. The main one really being this expression of a personal signature idea, some kind of defining idiosyncratic idea that was really motivating their participation and their learning in that class. But they also talked about appropriation as having a thick metacognitive or epistemological dimension as well, that it could be a carrier of social relationships, that it should be grounded in the discipline. So they shouldn't be talking about something that really isn't physics that they just think is physics. Like there needs to be some grounding there in what the discipline of physics really is, and non-incidental in that they would kind of bring this up through repeated words and phrases throughout the study period. And I won't spend much time really breaking this down as much as I just wanted to give 2 examples of what they defined as like a personal signature idea for 2 different students. That for Mikkel, that was curiosity for how things work. So basically he would frequently discuss just wanting to understand how engines work. Like why did objects move? Like what was going on there? Or Lorenzo talking about this interest in just having a unified, consistent framework for understanding. The idea that we could observe things and either quantify it or define it with a law was very important for him and his appropriation of learning physics. And we saw this paper and we thought it was a very interesting idea that we wanted to adapt a little bit to our own interests, where rather than kind of looking at students interacting in one particular class, you wanted to study students in a statistics program and look for evidence that they were appropriating statistics as a field that they wanted to be in, how they saw a place for themselves and what was really motivating their interest in learning statistics. So we have a couple different constructs that I'll relate kind of in the next slide here. So we have statistics, where we want to be careful that we don't want to define statistics as a static thing, that statistics is a discipline. It's developed, expanded, and maintained by a community. Statistics is what, largely what this community says it is, that not everyone agrees what exactly statistics is or how we define this field. But it does exist as a community, and it does change and move over time as well. And then we also have students and their identity, where that's just going to be who they are, their motivations, their perspective, their sense of self. That's also going to change and adapt with new experiences. And we're really trying to look at how those 2 things connect or overlap. And so we have these other 2 terms that we're trying on. One of them we call their disciplinary perspective or their statistical perspective. And that's basically how they see statistics, how they're envisioning these elements or practices of statistics. And then appropriation is referring to this process of them kind of developing a personal identity. They're seeing a place for themselves in this world that they're understanding, that they have a signature view or a signature purpose for what they're going to do in statistics. So that's a lot of ideas. And I'm going to try to connect them with a metaphor. If anyone's familiar with Greenough's environment metaphor for number sense, it's kind of a similar attempt that I'm going to make, that we can think of statistics kind of like a city or a place. It is both kind of its physical attributes and its actual community of people. You know, if you talk about the city of Pittsburgh, you know, I could be referring to the people who live there, or I could be talking about the physical, you know, place of Pittsburgh, but both of them kind of belong in that idea. And the students here are kind of like explorers in that city. They're developing perspectives of what this city is. They've been to different places, they have different ideas of what this city is, and they're also considering a future in this city. They're trying to think of who they're going to be as somebody who lives here, what they're going to do, what they're going to add or contribute in this city. And we think that might be one way to think about how these incoming statistics majors both perceive statistics and demonstrate evidence of disciplinary appropriation. So both kind of what they think statistics is and how they're developing that vision for themselves of who they are in statistics, what they're going to do, and how their identity and their interests and their motivations belong in statistics. So we're doing some qualitative research with case studies. We're looking at 9 incoming freshmen majoring in statistics at a large public university in the United States. We'd like to eventually study more, but this is just kind of where we're starting at. We have pretty good gender representation, 4 male, 4 female, and 1 student who identified as non-binary. We didn't specifically ask students to identify race or ethnicity, so these are just kind of ad hoc classifications. And we really want to mention these just because we have pretty historically represented students rather than necessarily underrepresented students. So we don't want to make claims necessarily about the experiences of underrepresented students just because we don't really have data about that. We did semi-structured interviews of about 1 hour. This was during the first week of school. During their first week here at the university, they were all incoming freshmen who were declaring a major in statistics. We asked them the same statistics task that you saw earlier, who is statistics? We asked them things about what skills or character traits they think a successful statistician or data scientist should have, why they chose statistics, any related coursework or project experiences they've had so far, any long-term and their long-term interest with statistics as well. So we did some in vivo coding, and we also coded for these 5 markers of appropriation using these interview transcripts. And these were performed by each of us separately. We had some recursive discussions about the cases. We were discussing how we were finding evidence of each marker or whether it was largely absent in each case. And then trying to get to this identification of how these cases were similar or how they contrasted, just to get some more kind of rich understanding of who these people were, how their stories might be unique from one another. So today we're just going to talk really briefly about 3 of these students. For each student, I'm going to share at least 1 quote, or just a paraphrase of a quote, followed by some of these appropriation markers that we think might be present for that student after the first interview. And I'm going to start with a student who we're terming as Sammy. So one of the questions that we asked was what specific skills or abilities that you think a successful statistician or data scientist needs to complete those tasks. So she talked about some tasks earlier in the interview. And Sammy said, definitely being detail oriented. I think that's really important with that, being able to, I guess, admit that you're a human, you make mistakes, and normalizing, going back and checking and ensuring that all of your data is correct and entered correctly. Again, being like a team player, being able to coordinate with anyone else that you're working on a project with, especially about things that are really important, or if you make a mistake, to be like, hey, I need to go back and redo this. And we think this quote is pretty indicative of a fundamental view that she has of statistics, that there is an importance to being correct, that things should be done accurately. That's an important part of doing statistical work. Sammy also had a little bit more to her identity than just this idea of statistics, though. She was also really interested in advocacy work, education as well. So I won't read this quote word for word, but just to kind of paraphrase it, she talked about this, decision she had between studying statistics or mathematics. She really liked mathematics. She liked solving problems and getting an answer in mathematics. At the same time, she also had a passion for education, for special ed teaching. She wasn't sure if she wanted to be a special ed teacher herself, but she certainly wanted to be involved in something like that, where she felt like she was really making a difference. So in terms of Sammy's profile, it was a little bit more mixed in the sense that some aspects of her identity didn't quite link up to some of her aspects of what statistics is and how that would all fit together. So we termed her the data inspector, where Sammy drew this picture of this kind of nerdy guy for her who is statistics course. She talked about this idea of accuracy, and she discussed her personal signature as applying mathematics to real world data to help companies make decisions. And that was a little bit more neutered in the sense that there wasn't a lot of specificity to it. It was a more general description of what you do in statistics. Her metacognitive and epistemic dimension was more focused on making sure things are done correctly while acknowledging some uncertainty that we can't always control in the process. I already mentioned the social role, and then there is some disciplinary grounding in that she recognizes important pieces like coding, analysis, working on a team, but she struggled a little bit more with this bigger picture of what is ultimately accomplished or where these non-objective pieces might fit in to doing statistics. Some of her repeated words or themes had this crossover between things like advocacy, teaching, feeling, wanting, love, education, but also some of these other things like math, memorize, student, school. Her view of statistics was very influenced by her AP statistics course, where she talked a lot about memorizing, using procedures, more of those kind of traditional aspects of doing statistics. So we didn't see a lot of evidence of clear appropriation from Sammy, that it was still very early on and not as clearly developed yet. Liam was a slightly different story in the sense that he had a little bit more of a personal signature that was more identifiable, a little bit more unique. So he talked a lot about being able to interpret data and understanding data. So this idea of processing new information quickly, that's an important part of being a statistician. He used this example of COVID, looking at numbers and seeing how fast the vaccine is working or how fast people are getting COVID-19, how fast the disease is spreading. So just being able to apply your data to real world situations quickly was important. So not as much focus on like kind of the procedures or the correctness, as much as just like how it was useful, how it could be used. There's this idea of like using statistics as a language or as a way to see patterns. Liam also had an interest in statistics because he was a huge baseball fan. So he talked a lot about sports analytics as well. And that was something that really drew him into statistics, that he had been part of an online community related to baseball analytics. And he loved kind of reading statistics or thinking about how people measure things and how people make decisions using data in baseball. So we termed Liam the data interpreter in the sense that his personal signature was that statistics is like a language and it helps us see patterns and ideas that we can't otherwise see. He talked about Moneyball, if you've happened to see that movie before, as kind of his impression of statistics, something that he kind of envisioned for himself as a best case scenario. So his metacognitive and epistemic dimension was more focused on kind of stat as a language that's helpful, it's useful, it helps us find hidden truths. And there is some creativity in that process for how we get there. His disciplinary grounding, he recognized this role of creativity and knowledge and context enhances what you do, finding measures that are useful. And we can see that in a lot of his most common words and phrases. He did talk about work a lot, that this was, a job that he was going to have as well. He talked about the field, he talked about baseball, enjoy, experience. So there's a lot of words and phrases that kind of went with that idea for him. Priya was definitely a standout case in that she by far had the most experience with doing statistics. Probably anybody that we interviewed. And her story is really incredible that she took AP statistics. She really enjoyed the class, but she really wanted to do more. She was kind of unsatisfied with what AP statistics was in the sense that she wanted to actually do something. And so she ended up emailing, as she termed, about 60 professors around the country, looking at their publications and trying to find anyone she thought was interesting. And finally, someone emailed her back and invited her to join his research project. She was attending these causal inference seminars on Zoom. She'd have questions and people would help her. She was working with, I think it was a postdoc student on this project, and the postdoc would help her with coding. And she just felt like she was part of a community, and that was really important for her. This idea of, spreading knowledge, learning things, interacting with other people, and answering real questions as part of a genuine community. So we termed her as a data co-investigator, where the research community was really the important piece for her. It was a space to explore curiosities as part of this larger community. And she really saw this knowledge as almost built through community efforts, that there's peer evaluations, that people are collaborating, they're talking, they're sharing ideas, that if this person didn't know something, then somebody else might know. And so she really saw this role as a co-investigator, that she wanted to develop a skill set in statistics that was going to complement other researchers, that she wanted to kind of work alongside as part of these larger research community projects. She had a lot of rich experiences with projects, generating questions, cleaning data, trying analytical techniques, as she termed it, wanting to throw her computer out the window because programming was frustrating sometimes. And she really had that very full experience with statistics coming in as a first-year statistics major. So she was a really interesting case in that sense. So some very preliminary findings is just noticing what aspects of statistics drew some of these students in. So both in these 3 cases and just in the other 6 cases that we didn't talk about today, almost everybody talked about math as something that they liked or something they were good at, but not something that they wanted to study in and of itself. So people like doing math, but not necessarily doing and studying mathematics formally. Priya was actually the only student who very explicitly said that she didn't really like math that much, which we think was a really interesting anecdote given, given all of her experience. But she really wasn't in it because she loved math, even though she's probably competent enough at math that she can do what she needed to do. But almost everybody else really enjoyed math, had a lot of advanced math before starting. Some people talk more about the coding analytics, this idea of machine learning and data science being interesting. Students like Priya were really interested in the idea of investigation and research. What questions can I answer with statistics? We're also seeing these different dimensions of appropriation kind of popping up. So we talked about this dichotomy that some students really are in for data analysis for good versus maybe data analysis for fun. So this idea of I want to study statistics to change the world and make a positive difference versus I just really love doing statistics and playing with code and learning new things. That different students kind of were on different places of that spectrum. Perhaps some students would say both, but we definitely saw some distinctions on that aspect as well. A love of
5 minutes, Kelly, sorry to interrupt.
Oh, thank you so much. A love of the methods versus a love of what I can apply the methods to. So kind of related to that of just like, do they really love the statistics part? Do they love the methods themselves? Or is it more just like, what is this useful for? And some factors that we think seemed important as a pathway to appropriation was participation in projects and perhaps finding community. Those were very important especially for Priya. to some degree for Liam as well, and a couple other students that we saw some more advanced aspects of appropriation. So there's a lot of things that we want to do next, but we're going to follow these students each year of their program if they are willing to be interviewed again. We're about to do another batch of interviews here in the next week or two. So we're hoping to study these students every year until they graduate. And then just doing a little bit more trying to link appropriation to pathways, trying to understand like what experiences really are important, who stays in the program and what's motivating for that. All right, so I'll stop there. And I have some sample questions up here, but I'd be happy if anyone else has other questions as well that they'd like to ask or any comments they'd like to share as well. It doesn't have to be a question.